This is an audience in which I really can say, my dear brothers and sisters. First, there's a lot of people in the audience who are not going to get to speak, and I just think they need to be recognized. For example, Pierce Corden over here did an enormous amount of work in the Arms Control Disarmament Agency with the arms control treaties that we have, and he was on the Holy See's delegation that helped bring about the treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons. And next to him is Ambassador If, another distinguished diplomat who's helped make the world so much safer. And I would be most remiss in neglecting pointing out my real brother, Rick Boardman, who I've never publicly thanked for his witness during the Vietnam War, where his conscience led him to spend several years in jail because he was not going to go to Vietnam and kill people. And it's really, it made me think about, you can't measure the power of witness and the power of virtue. And that goes right to the gospel, right to Jesus. You can't measure success by the metrics of the world when you're dealing with issues of conscience and issues of this profundity. And I think that's part of what Pope Francis' call is for us to get an entirely different set of metrics to look at nuclear weapons. Not just the humanitarian consequences, but the spiritual consequences, the denial of our humanity. I mean, do we need ethics to tell us we need an 11th commandment that says, thou shalt not kill everyone? Right? Do we need to unpack the golden rule and deny and challenge the idea these weapons are good for us but not good for you? I mean, we already have the ethical foundations right there. What we don't have is the political traction to bring this to the forefront. How did we get here? Well, we've been here before. In the 17th century, technique overruled purpose. There was the 30 Years' War that led to the creation of the modern state. And what was the technique debate? It was whose narrative of the best way to express the love of the gospel was better. And Protestants and Catholics continued to slaughter each other because their technique, their rites, rituals, practices, and doctrines overruled the purpose of the technique, which was to manifest the love of God amongst human beings. And we created the nation states in Westphalia for that purpose. And nuclear weapons are precisely the same phenomena, where the technique of pursuing security has overridden the goal of obtaining security. So the more you perfect the weapon, the less security you obtain. And we're trapped in this wrongful definition of what is the metric of success. We're told, oh, well, that a morally coherent approach is not practical. Well, I would say, yeah, if you have a morally coherent policy that's not practical, it's not very good. But if you have a policy that's alleged to be practical but not morally coherent, you end up with improved means to unimproved ends. And that's what we have, because we have not infused the debate with the moral dimension. And that's why the Pope's admonition, the Pope's call, is so terribly important. The only lacking thing in the analysis for me is, Laudato Si and his statements on nuclear, the failure of nuclear deterrence are luminous in their clarity. There's just one issue, which is taking innocent young men and women, 19, 20-year-old kids, and indoctrinating them with the alleged virtue of being willing to kill hundreds of millions of innocent people. What does that do to the souls of those young men and women? That they are so distorted in their values and that they are ready in good conscience to commit such horrific, immoral conduct. Imagine imagine just parsing that out, that you have to convince them to do this in good conscience. Oh, and by the way, your presentation on conscience, I thought, was just so fabulous. And so April 6th this year at the United Nations is International Day of Conscience. And I hope the Holy Nuncio, that the Holy See's mission at the UN participates robustly and brings the Holy Father's points on our responsibility to the natural world and our responsibility to get rid of nuclear weapons as expressions of global conscience, as expressions. Because, I mean, it's the only voice that could legitimately do that. And I hope that it's done. Well, where are we today? Well, you know, historically, nuclear weapons have been justified based on the doctrine of strategic stability. It's not very measurable, and that's an international justification. But the same people that are justifying it internationally as strategic stability domestically argue we need to pursue military advantage. So, wait a minute. Strategic stability, military advantage. It appears to me that these are two contradictory pursuits. But it gets even worse today. The Joint Chiefs of Staff of the U.S. military, in its joint publication 3-72 of June 11th, 2019, on nuclear operations, and I'll just quote it for you, integration of nuclear weapons into a theater of operations requires the consideration of multiple variables. Using nuclear weapons could create conditions for decisive results and the restoration of strategic stability. Specifically, the use of a nuclear weapon will fundamentally change the scope of a battle and create conditions that affect how commanders will prevail in conflict. Now, that is a long way from what I hope comes out of the conference that Ambassador Goodby is involved in, a long way from the joint statement of Mikhail Gorbachev and President Ronald Reagan, a nuclear war can never be won and therefore must never be fought. This is a long way from the pursuit of strategic stability. This is a long way from reasonable behavior. And the worst part of it is it justifies this attitude of other countries that will certainly be threatening the United States. That's why Pope Francis' message is so important, because it sets a clarity of purpose, and all of these nonsensical policies are illuminated by the clarity of moral compass. He said in Nagasaki, "Our world is marked by a perverse dichotomy that tries to defend and ensure stability and peace through a false sense of security sustained by a mentality of fear and mistrust, one that ends up poisoning relationships between peoples and obstructing any form of dialogue." The cost of nuclear weapons is not just the money and the theft from the poor, it is the poisoning of human relationships. It is not just the willingness to inflict impossibly destructive humanitarian suffering on massive numbers of people, but in the present, the very threat to use them poisons relationships, and it poisons the spirit. Promises have been made in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to fulfill Article 6. 13 practical steps in 2000, which included an unequivocal undertaking to obtain the elimination of nuclear weapons that the nuclear weapon states adopted. Rational steps that lead us down the ladder to a level of safety. A test ban treaty, a fissile material cutoff treaty, strengthening verification, lowering the operational status of the weapons. We've walked away from those. And in the frustration of the failure to live up to the NPT, in 2017, 122 countries came together at the UN and adopted the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The preamble of the treaty is most instructive because it talks in terms of human consequences, the horrific destructive capacity, and the intrinsically indiscriminate effect of the weapons. It talks a language that normal people can understand, and that's its highest value. Because most of the countries, in fact, all of the countries that have thus far signed and ratified it, and all of the countries, almost all the countries that support it, are non-nuclear weapon states parties in the NPT and members of nuclear weapons-free zones. As I remind you, nuclear weapons-free zones make the southern half of the planet Earth a virtual nuclear weapons-free world. And the majority of nations in the world, 115, are in nuclear weapons-free zones. Beautiful names. Treaty of Rarotonga for the South Pacific. Treaty of Tlatelolco for Latin America, you know. Treaty of Bangkok. Treaty of Astana. Well, I urge you to read the treaty because it provides for the engagement of countries with nuclear weapons to engage, and countries that give up nuclear weapons to engage, and countries without them. And it has an opening for the protocols that would address its shortcomings. It doesn't have verification. It doesn't have enforcement mechanisms. But those shortcomings could be addressed if the kind of joint enterprise was taken seriously. If the kind of enterprise that Ambassador Goodby has set forth, the nuclear weapon states could come together and say, this is how the verification system that we need, this is the enforcement system that we need, and we'll do it in protocols with in a time-bound framework. The structure is there to do it. The problem is we haven't created the political will. So I'm in a really interesting prayer group with Ambassador Goodby. I urge you to go to thenuclearprayer.com, and you'll see Ambassador Goodby, Ambassador Thomas Graham, Secretary Perry, and Secretary Schultz and I asking for help from the higher power. Because that's something that we haven't done. We haven't changed the framework of the debate from what's right and wrong, from what's sin and salvation. And that's what our job is, and that's what we're called to do. I'm running out of time. There's just so much I want to share, but I want to just share this one simple idea. We need to build coalitions. Martin Luther King's genius in organizing was he went from the particular of lunch counters to buses to the community to poor people to social justice itself to war to nuclear weapons and then to the big tent of those who have love. And he continued to invite more people to the party. What we have now is the constrictions of identity politics, which divide us. What we have now is our adversaries take the issue of abortion and build coalitions of people who want more money for prisons, less money for schools, more money for military, less money for health care. There's no natural coalition there, but they've done that. We have a natural coalition. People who care about the abolition of nuclear weapons have a natural coalition with people who care about the living systems upon which civilization depends, the climate, the rainforest, the topsoil, the water table. We have a natural coalition actually with people who are against hurting fetuses because we're for pro-life after birth. That life is one, and you have to protect it in all dimensions. We have a natural affinity, but we haven't built those coalitions. So I would urge that we have another conference on the themes of protecting our common future, climate, development, human rights, and nuclear weapons, and bring the students who care already about human rights, who care already about the climate. But it's not a conference on this one, but it's a conference specifically on strategies of working together. I think that would be really great. Because what we have now is a failure of communication of what we're actually about. So one of the hats that I wear is I'm the representative of the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates to the UN. So every year, the Nobel Peace Laureates have a summit. And they reduced the strategy of helping to build these coalitions to compelling every political candidate to answer 3 questions. 1, what are you doing to eliminate poverty? 2, what are you doing to protect the climate? And 3, what are you doing to get rid of nuclear weapons? Now, if those were asked on pulpits, at mosques, in synagogues, if political candidates were challenged with these existential global issues, I think we could make a difference. And so last but not least, it is my plea that from the Vatican and from the kind of distinguished Catholic scholars we have here and spiritual leaders we have here, that we have a concerted effort to drive the message of Pope Francis in Laudato Si, our responsibility to the natural world and to each other, because it's a lot about human solidarity and intergenerational solidarity in Laudato Si, and the Holy Father's position on nuclear weapons to a local level. I know that it can work. And I'm going to end right here giving a personal story. When the Chemical Weapons Convention was up for a vote, Rick Santorum was a key senator, a very right-wing conservative from Pennsylvania. And I personally went to Cardinal Bevilacqua and asked him what he was doing about the prevarications of the senator. And he wasn't doing anything. So I suggested he should be reminded of how important the position of the Holy See on abortion was to his election, and that how important it was to the Holy See to bring the Chemical Weapons Convention into force. Within 3 days, he supported the Chemical Weapons Convention. So all we need to do is remind them that they got there. The President of the United States I think this is taking God's name in vain, used abortion in that big rally last week. I don't think he cares all that much about right to life, but he sure cares a lot about getting elected. And we need to put the fire to the feet of these politicians on the entire package of the sacredness of human life and the power of love. Thank you.